Le gwoka est la musique racine de la Guadeloupe, qui est devenue l'élément représentatif de l'identité guadeloupéenne. À l'origine pratiquée essentiellement par les descendants des déportés africains mis en esclavage, le gwoka s'est aujourd'hui étendu à toutes les couches sociales, tous les groupes ethniques et religieux de la société guadeloupéenne.
This clip was part of UNESCO's representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity in 2014 on gwoka, the root music of Guadeloupe. Gwoka, which translates as big drum, has become the representative element of Guadeloupean identity. Originally practiced mainly by the descendants of African captives who were enslaved, gwoka has since spread to all social classes, all ethnic and religious groups within Guadeloupean society. It is observed that the participants in the gwoka art form and the public, encircled as dancers and soloists, take turns performing while facing the drums. This formation reinforces the identity and the feeling of communal development, individual pride, and according to UNESCO, conveys values of conviviality, resistance, and dignity. I am Anna-Kaye Smith, an MPhil in French student in the Department of Modern Languages and Literatures, where my research focuses on the use of gamification to integrate Francophone culture at the exploratory stages of 5E French lessons. This research is my attempt to merge my background in instructional design and technology with foreign language education. It is with this keen interest that I try to explore how cultural practices impact the preservation and innovation of Guadeloupean culture within the broader Caribbean context. This presentation will steer towards an abbreviated version of the history of Guadeloupe and its Creole identity, the role of cultural policies in shaping cultural identity, how Guadeloupe fits into French national policy versus local cultural autonomy in preserving Guadeloupean Creole culture, and exploring how Pointe-à-Pitre could be positioned as Guadeloupe's creative city. Guadeloupe is nicknamed Île Papillon to describe its butterfly formation of its two main islands, Basse-Terre and Grande-Terre, when viewed from above. It is located in the archipelago of islands and islets northeast of the Caribbean Sea and west of the Atlantic Ocean in the Lesser Antilles. Research proves that Guadeloupe was populated by the Arawak indigenous group as far back as 3000 BC, followed by the Kalina group that displaced the Arawaks in 1400. In 1493, Christopher Columbus was the first European to see Guadeloupe, landed there, and gave it its current name. In 1626, the French colonized Guadeloupe, annihilated the indigenous group by communicable diseases and/or violence. In 1650, the French forcefully brought the first enslaved Africans to toil the sugarcane fields to create a highly prosperous sugarcane plantation economy until May 27, 1848, when the French slave trade was abolished. Here we have a piece on display at the Memorial Act Museum of the Enslaved in Pointe-à-Pitre, which was opened in 2015. In 1943, Guadeloupe, a former French colony, became an overseas department of France. What does this mean for Guadeloupe being a French overseas department? It means that Guadeloupe is part of French national territory with the same rights, responsibilities, and obligations as mainland France. It is like Jamaica that currently has 14 parishes, but hypothetically, let's say Trelawney is physically located in the Pacific Ocean. Still a parish, but not attached to Jamaica's mainland. The Butterfly Islands' rich ethnic diversity, due to the blending of Taino, African, European, Indian, and Oriental histories, has influenced Guadeloupe's language, food, art, dance, music, and belief systems to shape a Creole culture. The question that I posed here was if this rich history has been the heart of Guadeloupe's identity and resilience through colonization and post-colonial change, with the former culture or the former colony still a central part of their daily operations, who then decides what aspects of Guadeloupe's cultures are preserved, promoted, or prioritized without marginalizing the over 370,000 people who live in this territory, and how do they do it? To answer this question, it is important to explore this foundational question. What is a cultural policy? Now, according to UNESCO, a cultural policy is a body of operational principles, administrative and budgetary practices and procedures which provide a basis for cultural action by the state. The Brokolo posits that cultural policy originated from cultural studies and, by extension, political science, and it seeks to understand how society might rediscover the appropriate limits of the market paradigm for decision-making that uses economics as its chief social science. With all the bodies involved in shaping a framework for preserving and promoting culture, clashes are inevitable when it comes to approaches showcasing culture. Developing cultural policies in the Caribbean has not been an easy feat. The history of becoming a Creole society means that there are constant negotiations and compromises while existing in the context of high culture. Burke stresses the need for consistent interaction and synergy between the major ethnic, class, and color groups. It is with this perspective that Guadeloupe is an arena to explore how its rich culture of a Creole society is preserved and promoted while still being an overseas department of their once colonizers. Guadeloupe has a cultural policy and is overseen by Guadeloupe Regional Council, or the Conseil Régional de la Guadeloupe, an elected governing body with specific responsibilities for the region of Guadeloupe within the French Republic. Although Jamaica is an independent state, Guadeloupe Regional Council is similar to how the centralized government with ministries operate here in Jamaica. The role of Guadeloupe's cultural policy is to preserve and promote its rich cultural heritage, including artistic and creative industries, built heritage and traditions through investments, events, and awareness campaigns. Guadeloupe's cultural policy falls under three levels: the national, regional, and local. The national level is the direct body of the French Ministry of Culture, and it provides any legal framework and national funding, while the regional level is managed by the Regional Council of Guadeloupe, and their key responsibilities is to adapt any national mandates, that's the French, to local, in this case, Guadeloupe sustainability. The local level now, it encompasses the municipalities and the communes, and they're responsible for organizing local events, activities, and youth activities. Know that it is established as to who decides what aspects of the Guadeloupe's culture, Guadeloupean cultures, are preserved, promoted, or prioritized. The bigger picture or the bigger question is how. Guadeloupe showcases their language, music, dance, art, food through festivals and other public events, spaces that highlight their visual and performing arts, media, and broadcast programs.
Watch you now, this is the bad girl style. Ashencia. Tu sais qui c'est Tony. Watch you now. Hold me waist and wine. My body dead like a ancient time.
While your waist and wine, body in bed like a ancient time.
Me and you on the dance floor, so come on boy, make me sing it for you.
Just a dance on the dance floor. Son a tell when you fling it on ya.
DJ start play my song. No rules, no telling, no right from wrong.
Fasten up.
Guadeloupe has produced musicians like Stony Music, who in 2017 collaborated with Jamaica's Shenzia. This song fuses Guadeloupe's zouk musical genre with Jamaica's dancehall. One of the most notable events is Guadeloupe's Carnival that spans for several weeks. It begins on the first Sunday in January, that's Epiphany, and culminates on Ash Wednesday, marking the end of festivities before Lent. This major cultural event highlights the island's rich traditions. Some of the traditions include Vaval, a mascot that represents social or current affairs and is satirically mocked and burned on Ash Wednesday. This act symbolizes purification of souls and the end of the carnival season. The Grande Parade features groups that compete in lively tableau, dance, and music. There are different types of carnival groups, or what we call bands. The pole bands, named after the drums that they use, that group emerged in the 1980s, the most traditional form of carnival of yesteryear. Then we have the snare drum band, that is another band that has similar sounds and aesthetics to Rio Carnival in Brazil. T-mass bands play on the humor register. The participants are usually garbed in caricatures based on current affairs, and most times they wear a monkey mask. Nicknamed the sound system on wheels, the synth band that's on the right, they basically transport equipment on flatbed trucks. The parades begin on Shrove Sunday and continue until Ash Wednesday, when Vaval is burned to dust, making the end of the festivities. What is interesting about Guadeloupe's carnival is that not only are the diverse ethnic groups coming together to celebrate their history and rich traditions, but Guadeloupe's carnival is also a space for Guadeloupeans to send out political messages, often in the form of derision and condemnation. Now, a historical example of how Guadeloupeans use cultural and public events like Carnival to send out political messages occurred in January 2009 when Guadeloupe staged a 44-day strike that caused widespread civil unrest pioneered by the Liège Comprofession, or the LKP, an umbrella trade union and social movement organization. This 44-day strike sought to address the high cost of living, economical exploitation, and racial inequalities that Guadeloupeans face daily. The Vaval, the Po, and T-mass bands use their platform during the carnival season to highlight the issues that Guadeloupeans faced. The mass demonstrations caused major disruptions to the island that forced the then President Nicolas, that's a French President, Nicolas Sarkozy, to acknowledge the grievances that the Overseas Department faced. On March 4th, 2009, the strikes ended when the French government conceded and they actually increased the salaries of the lowest paid by 200 euros. And in 2025, that would be the equivalent of 274 euros or over 46,000 Jamaican dollars. The French government also granted the top 20 demands of the LKP. The agreement was called the Jacques Binot Accord to honor the union activist who was killed during the strike. Over 30,000 Guadeloupeans marched through the streets of Pointe-à-Pitre, the capital, on March 7. This 44-day strike influenced unions in overseas territories like Martinique, French Guiana, and even the Reunion in the Indian Ocean to have their own general strikes. This type of protest and advocacy inspired others in similar plight to speak up and act in unison for change. These situations underscore how Guadeloupeans utilize cultural festivities like Carnival and other public movements to articulate their dissatisfaction and advocate for change regarding their political and economic conditions as a French overseas department. Therefore, as one explores how Guadeloupe's cultural policy seeks to showcase, promote, and preserve their culture, it is necessary to investigate if local Guadeloupeans truly benefit. For example, in this policy, the French Ministry of Culture highlights the economic opportunities for Guadeloupe through its cultural tourism and festivals to provide a source of income for artisans, musicians, artists, and small vendors, and through public funding, support upcoming artists and creative industries. Youth groups in schools and communities also benefit from programs that facilitate the nurturing of the arts into a career path. However, there are issues such as some ethnic groups or rural communities having limited access to these cultural programs and funding. There's also evidence that shows how the elite groups in Guadeloupe have more access to cultural promotions that are state-sponsored. In the same 44-day strike by the Lionnage Compartissant, the group argued that aspects of the Guadeloupean culture are exploited for tourism or presented in such a way that is more palatable for the external audience, thus watering down the quality of Guadeloupean Creole culture. It all boils down to commodification versus authenticity. In the Guadeloupean culture policy, the creative industry is a key pillar that falls under the strategic plans of the Guadeloupe Regional Council and the Direction des Affaires Culturelles to propel cultural identity, economic development, and employment among the youth. While these governing bodies promote creative industries as a pivotal sector, there is no cultural and creative industries policy. Flu, as cited in Chan's book review on global creative industries, posits that in the context of cultural and creative industries, or what we call CCIs, there needs to be a paradigm shift in the cultural policy that use the patron model to move to an architect model. As Flu's idea is contextualized in Guadeloupe's situation, his theory suggests that an overseas department like Guadeloupe needs to move away from the patron model, where the state, in their case France, funds the cultural and creative industries, to where Guadeloupe becomes the architect, where its own cultural policy is the vehicle for social and economic development and a driving force for innovation. Hickling, in her conference presentation on developing cultural and creative industries policy, the socio-politics of cultural and creative industries in the 21st century, focus on Jamaica, further posits that policies that may be successful in industrial nations may not be applicable in developing countries like Jamaica. This salient point drives into the disconcerting feelings that I have with Guadeloupe's cultural policy. The cultural policy was constructed and trickled down from the French Republic to the regional, then the local levels, an attempt that was made to adapt the policy into a creolized society. This patron model does not promote a sustainable and inclusive economy for all, but rather causes Guadeloupe to continue depending on France to fund its creative economies. Hickling stresses the importance of developing a cultural and creative industries policy that is tailored to each nation's socio-political and economic realities. And while Hickling's position is within the context of an independent developing nation like Jamaica, her ideas are also relevant for the Guadeloupean context, even though it is a dependent state. I believe that if Guadeloupe's cultural policy were to follow the architect model as presented by Flu, the culture of Guadeloupe has the potential to be more advanced in its development to the point where the social welfare of every ethnic group is aligned. I say this because even though Guadeloupe Regional Council strategic plan highlights the creative industry as a key pillar, In my research, I started looking at UNESCO's Creative Cities Network. The Creative Cities Network is a program that recognizes cities all over the world that foster creativity and innovation under the following categories: music and media arts, craft and folk, design, film, gastronomy, and literature. These fields are key drivers for a more inclusive and sustainable urban development. Guadeloupe, despite having a strong Creole culture that has created a language, music, art, food, crafts, and influenced belief system, does not have a city like Pointe-à-Pitre as a creative city. Guadeloupe has the underpinnings to be or to have a creative city if their representation was more aligned to the people that the culture represents. The cultural policy, as it is, does not provide an economic liberalization that develops this country's culture economically. And that is because, as many social and political activists within the LKP have stated, their culture has become watered down and more palatable to serve those who invest in their tourism economy, for example. And in their case, it is France and by extension, Europe. As Hendrickson and Naya examine factors for Jamaica's successful global contribution in Jamaica's music and film, in their case study entitled A Study on the Creative Industry as a Pillar of Sustained Growth and Diversification, the film and music sectors in Jamaica, a recommendation that was noted is for advocacy in innovating financial mechanisms that cater to the needs of creative enterprises. And this recommendation reinforces FLU's position on countries adopting the architect model for economic development, investing in cultural and creative industries to create its own revenue, to raise its own capital for future development in that country's music, art, food, and dance. This would, for example, lessen Guadeloupe's dependency on their sovereign nation to fund and develop the rich culture of the many marginalized youths left behind, like the youth in the country. As I conclude, the topic of the role of cultural policy in preserving and innovating Guadeloupe Creole culture is more nuanced. While there is a cultural policy, it more serves the intentions of the French Republic rather than the social welfare of the average Guadeloupean craft vendor or a Goka drummer, for example. Seeing how a set of people can come together and use a cultural event like Carnival to protest against the unfair treatment of the people living on the island while advocating for improved wages and better facilities, and to get a successful outcome as the French government sought to address their needs, are indicators of what a culture that unites people is able to achieve. The policies as it relates to culture and the cultural and creative industries policies must be created by the people at the local and grassroots levels and passed up to the French Republic rather than from the national to trickle down for Guadeloupe to adapt. This will promote and preserve Guadeloupean culture and provide a better roadmap on the economic development of the cultural and creative industries that can fund itself while improving the social welfare of the people of the Île Papillon, Guadeloupe.